let you guys know. All right, we are live, and good afternoon, everybody. Here we are once again on our series for criminal justice reform, just beyond the conversation. Today, we are very lucky to have one of the best criminal defense minds in the country. Uh, Before I introduce Charlie Swift, we have APPAC National Board of Directors, Dr. Rizwan Naeem, and of course, man of the hour, Charlie. Charlie, welcome to APPAC.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
And you know, for anybody that does not know Charlie, I'll tell you, you guys are gonna learn a lot today because one of the two things, he was named one of the 100 best criminal mind, not criminal minds,
Civil rights.
civil rights lawyer, civil rights lawyer in the United States. He is a decorated Navy JAG. One of his claim to fame was he defended the driver of Osama bin Laden, and he was representing him through the government of the United States in the court of law. And he defended him to the extent of the Constitution of the United States and got him freed. And again, that goes to show the strength of our Constitution, that when you have the right people defending the Constitution, a lot more can get done. And a lot of people have a lot of rights. And today's conversation will go into two parts. One is a more philosophical discussion that we will start with. And second part is specifically questions that we as Muslim Americans really feel are important, and something that we are afraid to ask. Sometimes we are intimidated to ask, and sometimes we don't know where the answers are, so we don't even know where to ask. So, you know, without further ado, I'll give floor to Dr. Rizwan Naeem, and he will jump into the first question, which is philosophical, and then I'll go into the conversation of, you know, our community, what it matters to them, and hopefully we'll get a lot of these conversations, you know, out there for people to learn from. And as we had said before, that, you know, we don't want this conversation just to be a conversation alone. We want this conversation that creates some action items. Charlie, just want to let you know, we had our first conversation last week about the police reform, and then we sent massive emails and whatnot. And New York State, we were able to, as a community, come together and repeal one of the part of the civil rights law, which is 50A, which shielded police officers' records. So now they are up for anybody to know through Freedom of Information Act. So again, first conversation about what we have to do, created an action item, and got the results. Today, we hope to do the same thing. Go ahead, Dr. Rizwan.
Welcome, Charlie, and it is again a pleasure meeting you again. If you remember, we met at Dr. Ijaz's house a few months ago. And as Charlie doesn't need any real, what you call introduction, he's been a leading lawyer for constitutional rights, constitutional complexities, I would say.
But yes.
And
complexities is the place.
And we will try to dissect it today for our audience as what is really protesters and what we call it as a right way of mentioning what your rights are. So what are the laws and what are the law, where the defect is, means what we have seen of violence and so on and so on, such a wave of human rights and Black Lives Matters and minority rights matters gatherings and issues. But I want you to really dissect between what the laws are at present and what the rights are at present and what we can or cannot do. Please go ahead, start.
Okay, let's start with the idea, and the question as I understood it was, is there something wrong with the law?
Yes.
Are all of this happening because of the law? And on the surface, you might say, no, it's illegal to murder people. No, it's an enforcement problem. But that's not true. There are some things that are very, very wrong with the law. And let's first start. I was asked on the part in the Floyd case, while they are bringing murder cases, and Keith Ellison is going to do a terrific job if anyone can, it would be very interesting to see whether the Floyd family could actually sue the police for personal liability on his behalf. Now, it would seem that certainly if you can charge him with murder, you can sue him. And they probably could under some state tort statutes, maybe. Minnesota would likely settle. But the federal law that would prevent this is hardly clear. Because the federal law, the way the judges have interpreted it over the years is that to sue, it has to be a clear constitutional violation. Floyd, the police officers' lawyers will say, well, those holds, that putting the knee on the neck, that's around the country. That can't be clearly unconstitutional. Well, for 8 minutes when you're screaming, well, has any court ever ruled that it was 8 minutes? Is there a time limit on it? See, even if he violated the Constitution, it wouldn't be clear to him that he was violating the Constitution, and he would be immune. And the suit would be dismissed. More recently, the court made it even harder. They said you can dismiss the suit unless it states a clear constitutional violation. So we're not finding out what constitutional violations are anymore clearly. So we're stuck in the status quo. So the first part comes is one of the great enforcers of rights in this country are the courts. And where the state is not enforcing those rights, it falls on the individual. And we cannot always count on the state to enforce somebody's rights. They don't do so equally. And this is one of the ideas of the Constitution. The Constitution is supposed to limit the states, limit their power. It's a protection of the people against the government. But here, we are almost exclusively dependent upon the state to enforce. So the first thing is, that's a judge-made doctrine. There's a law in place, and that's how they've interpreted it. The easiest way is to change the liability laws, as you just did for the idea of making police records public. If you eliminate some of the liability on it, then, or the protections on the liability, organizations will reform. I give the great example. Everybody gives the example of the McDonald's coffee, how this was terrible tort law. I don't see it that way at all. Because before, I remember McDonald's before the coffee. And it was 180 degrees. I couldn't drink it. You had to leave it cool. The whole idea on it was to make you get out of your car and come inside. They made it intentionally incredibly hot. Much harder than it was at Starbucks. Enough that the woman got second and third degree burns when the coffee cup overturned. After they were sued, people made fun, but the coffee changed. It wasn't 180 degrees, it was 160 degrees now. Still very hot, but not scalding. They put warning labels.
Charlie, for the police thing, is this a federal issue or a state issue? Or
it can be both.
But it can be both.
When you sue constitutionally, on the constitutional rights, you can be removed into federal court if you cite the federal Constitution. So if you have, and when you get removed into federal court, if you don't fix the federal part, you get dismissed. The police officer can move any constitutional question into federal court. So you might start in state court, but then the defendants will move it to federal court and then move for dismissal. So you really have to have a holistic system where we fix both the state legislature, because some state constitutions guarantee more rights, Some state constitutions guarantee less. But it's an overall process to ask every candidate as you're working forward and on political change, where do you stand on the idea of police immunity and qualified immunity? Because without, it's certainly not working right now under qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is preventing us from protecting. And qualified immunity, is one of those parts where the police, the case never gets to trial. We never get to a jury. We never get to this. And I would say for the Muslim community, well, Muslims are not facing the same level of street. A lot of my clients, it's really hard for us to bring challenges to some of the national security problems that are unconstitutional, which, by the way, that same law protects religious discrimination in country of national origin. So it's a law that I think this community could get behind being able to be enforced, because they're likely to also be targeted in different ways. But again, if they do something new and novel, how do we know that that was a constitutional violation? Ultimately, for instance, after 9/11, everyone who was rounded up and then later let go, et cetera, in the great immigration parts, qualified immunity prevented from ever finding out whether that was constitutional. It protected the entire program. And you may be able to get a restraining order for the future, but where the government announces, well, we're not doing that anymore, or the program doesn't get out, you can't even get that. So, because you have to show it's recurring and the capability on it. So it is a challenge. The next thing, though, is police departments that want to reform have a significant difficulty reforming. We hear the bad apples, and Malcolm Gladwell wrote about that some years ago. He did a study. He's the guy who loves to look at numbers and the inside parts on economics. And Gladwell looked at this, and he found out that police officers, and anybody who's in the military knows this to be true, and probably most of you in business know it to be true. You spend 90% of your time on 10% of your people, don't you? You got 10% that are a problem. And particularly where it's not at will, it becomes a significant problem. And police unions in America have universally gotten weaker, with one exception: the police departments.
Right.
The police department unions are extraordinarily strong. And it's ironic that in quote unquote liberal cities like Seattle and Minneapolis, they have huge police violence problems. And one of the reasons is the union system makes it almost impossible to fire a bad officer. The negotiated contracts have come to such a point that it is extraordinarily difficult to terminate. And in many cases, this is part on the thing that I look at it from my military part, from my time in the military. There were some people who just weren't well suited to be in the military. They might really want to be in the military. They might really like the idea of the military, but they were not psychologically, personally, or physically well suited to the job. Those people we would move out.
So let's look at, for example, we're still waiting for our president's tax return for last few years. Yes. And that battle is in the Supreme Court now. And
yes.
They have their individual rights and whatsoever. And say what my question is, what we can do locally.
Locally. Okay, so locally.
Make sure.
Union agreement. Let's go locally.
90%, as you said.
Let's go locally.
Yes.
Locally. That's where I was going. The union, the bargain for in the police union is a local issue. It's not even a state issue.
Right.
It's going to be at each contract for your state, municipal, police, etc., unions, and the contract. This is locally bargained. So you want to take a hard look as a community as what are the disciplinary protections here? How long is the probationary period? What are the violations for which you are immediately fired? What are the suspension procedures? What do we do to get rid of bad police officers? If you, the police, are saying this is a few bad apples, why are they still here? Why did you not get rid of the bad apple
Right. So
5 years ago?
Just for our audience, I want to make sure that they understand. So these are local issues which
Absolutely.
you can work with your local councillors, you can work with your local mayor and demand that what is the fallback if something like that happens.
Right, exactly. In other words, I give a great example.
Yes.
And I'm not, this is either way. I live in McKinney, Texas. McKinney, Texas, a few years back got a little famous for swimming while black. You might recur. It was
Yes.
on comedy, etc. The police officer who got in that part. Do you know what happened to him?
No.
What do you think happened to him? Nothing, right?
Yeah, probably nothing.
Probably not.
Nope. He resigned rather than being fired at 11 o'clock the next day.
Hmm.
The chief of police said, I don't even need to decide whether there's a civil rights violation here. What I saw in policing a child's police pool party, you are not suited to be a policeman. Your temperament is not appropriate. You lose your temper too quickly. You become too aggressive too fast. You are not on it. And he was allowed to resign prior to being fired. And you know why? There's no union.
But then, Charlie, I have a quick question, right? I mean, there's a lot on the deterrent part, right? That people
Right.
say that, hey, listen, what are the deterrents are for police officers? Like the last conversation we had, Dr. Rizwan brought up a good point. He said, look, I'm a doctor, I practice, right? I have a malpractice insurance that I personally get liable for if there is
Right.
any malpractice, right? Police unions, and we hear this a lot, and now we're hearing this even more, that they're personally never held liable as far as the financial aspect.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's
And
either
again,
the city or the county who's on the hook, or the taxpayers,
There
even
are-
in the lawsuits.
Right. And all of these parts on it are things to look at and ask the questions. Now, remember, I'm going to be devil's advocate on the other side for a moment. All of them cost money. You are putting the police are paid by the community, unlike Dr. Aswan. So the community is happy to have him pay his part. Community may not be as happy to have their own pockets, because ultimately that's your tax dollars. On the other hand, what we presume is that the police departments, if they're held liable, will start to reform themselves. That we need common sense, but absolute protections are not working. To the extent that the police become a profession, they need to enhance professional ethics. I'm a lawyer. We also have a lot of doctors. We know, we look at part of it that we're governed by the federal government. We're governed by the courts, but we're also self-governing. And we kick a lot of people out. People don't know that. Dr. Aswad knows that, and I know that. That if you're not functioning up to speed, and one of the things is we need to professionalize the police department. They are not, this idea, if they're going to take on the responsibilities of life and death that I have, that Dr. Aswan has, I control people's freedom, there needs to be a level of professionalism. And that comes to the last part. How well do we train and professionalize the police? If they're going to be liable, and I'm not necessarily against that, how much are you going to pay them? And how are you going to professionalize them? How do you make them better? And that brings me to defund. Defund gets the wrong name. It's not defund the police, it's refund the police. And that means let's spend our money on best practices. Let's spend our money. Let's look at the idea that's holistic. In law and medicine, we already know this, that we need to spend our money in the ways that best provide the best level of care or service that we can. Because we did it, because leeches were used for 1,000 years does not mean we still use leeches.
Right.
We
So,
put in scientific. We look at,
right.
you know, in the health services business, we are using the police. And let's understand this. And this is to a part on the police. We are using the police to be EMTs. We are using the police to be eviction agents. We are using the police to be the mental health counselors of the streets, holders, etc., family interveners, you name it. They become like the military. And one of the problems is that refunding the police looks a
Right.
lot at,
So that is really a very good point you mentioned. Defund the police.
yes.
That's not what it means, right? What it means really, how can we fund appropriately on right places? So what the message I'm getting really, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's in the hand of voters to see and ask to their local council members and local assembly, local people, local mayor, that tell me what protections you have and how you hire and fire.
And training.
And I understand there's sometimes this is a union which deals with the contract, and you have to, and members, council members probably have to vote on that contract, if not mayor. But these are the valid questions. Before this incident, we didn't even know that there are questions like that. You can.
Oh, yes.
Right?
The last part
So-
I go in it, let me hit on the last part on thing. When we get to violence, the number one thing I see on it, and I wondered about it, this is a personal opinion, not a legal opinion, but one that comes from my background. One of the ways I got into the Naval Academy was that I was a pretty decent wrestler in high school. Not as good a wrestler at the Naval Academy. I did make the team, but other than that, I didn't do much. They were number 5 in the country. I was not a top 5 in the country wrestler. But I trained all the time in that. And I know how hard grappling is. In fact, wrestling is the best idea for, putting somebody and restraining them on the ground. It's what you learn to do in a non-lethal fashion. What they say is that the self-defense skills that the police learn in their school, if they don't practice them daily, they're gone within 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, they've forgotten everything that they learned in that, and they're back to brawling. And that's what you see in these videos, isn't it? Them just jumping on somebody and throwing their fist and brawling, rather than anyone who's actually truly trained in this knows, okay, put them on the ground. Here's the pressure point. Move the hand to the back. This will hold until they submit. Move to the next part. You don't put your hand on the throat. You put your foot across the back of the leg. They'll submit at this point. This is not what you do. It's a difficult, high adrenaline situation, and they're often dealing with difficult parts, and I'm not going to make it that their situation is always easy. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, how much training are they getting every day to be good at this so that they won't do it in a lethal way? How much training are they getting so that they have the confidence not to go to their gun?
So Charlie,
how much training are they getting?
Here.
What's that?
I'm going to interject here because I'm going to have to make a comment, right? On
Yes.
the training part. The comment that I have, and it's a lot of people ask this, is a very true question. A police that has a belt, you see that belt, right? Full of this, that, and the other, right? Are there not any non-lethal options, which we know these are a rhetorical question, right? To subdue somebody before you have gotten, and we have seen this over and over and over and again.
Sure, they're absolutely, again, let's go on the part is, when they lack training on the part, there are multiple ways. It should be a slowly escalating. What we know is, in all psychological studies, the less confidence you have in your training and ability, the more likely it is you are to escalate. So yes, we have provided tons of non-lethal options. You have to understand that they are operating when you are not in a training part from a point of fear. If you're not confident, this is the part that you have to now switch and put your head inside the head of the police officer. To us, we have a respect or fear or some part of them. We never shift over to the other part and say they may be afraid. We need to insist that they have a high level of physical fitness, a high level of training, a high level of actual part on this, so that when something happens, it is instilled in them to do it, it's become it. And we also have to put on, the last part is to create a culture inside law enforcement of support and self-correction.
So,
Too often inside the culture of the law enforcement is anyone who criticizes law enforcement from within law enforcement is castigated.
Mhm.
so
Could you
Charlie,
imagine a football team? Could you imagine any sports team in America where no player gets to criticize the worst player who loses, the worst player who commits all the penalties, who throws the other guy down on the ground and loses the game again and again? But you're not allowed to criticize him because you'll be breaking ranks with the team. Well, I played on a lot of teams. You engage in that kind of behavior, and by gosh, we're going to have a talk in the locker room.
so
And that's not considered being disloyal on the team. So the next thing that we have to do is carefully on the local council level. So when you're interviewing the chief of police, what kind of head coach are you hiring?
yes.
Are you hiring a hands-on head coach? Are you hiring a man or a woman who's going to get involved, who's going to promote leadership within the police locker rooms and other places that say, I will never allow and I will turn in anyone who does this. And if you don't play by our rules, you ain't going to be on this team. And our rules are stricter than the Constitution. Our rules are better than the Constitution. We look at that as a floor, not the ceiling. We are a better group than that.
Okay, so
So-
here's a curveball for you, Charlie.
Sure.
All right. I just had this conversation over the weekend with somebody, and their comment was, well, they have hired a lot of minorities
Yes.
into the force. What difference does it make, if any, to diversifying the police force if you have the law and the enforcement doing the right thing on the both ends?
Right. Well, I think diversity is incredibly important to effective policing. I don't think diversity has been incredibly effective in the standpoint of eliminating violence. Okay.
Explain that.
Well, let's go on. The first thing that's effective in policing is the more diversity I have when I walk into a neighborhood, and I'll use my example from national security. If I have someone who actually knows the Islamic neighborhoods and understands them, I'm immediately relieved. I'm not going to have to deal with prejudices and misperceptions about the community that will govern the policing, and they will see things that aren't there. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time educating. They're going to be more effective in gaining trust. They're going to be more effective in understanding what's going on. And we have a lot of diverse communities in this country. And it is incredibly important to be diverse in the people who employ police. Remember, they protect and serve, and we need a wide variety in part. Now, but a wide variety of people who are all police and the police are immunized and you have a culture of abuse, the minority officer faces a very difficult question. The first thing the minority officer wants to do is join the team. Play for the team. I mean, that's important. They didn't join it to represent the minority. They joined it to be part of the police. Remember that. So where the team and the culture doesn't create it, putting a minority in charge will not change the culture of abuse. It will not change the culture of what's going on in each of these places. So simply hiring and saying, okay, I'm going to, I don't think it'd be constitutional to do it to begin with, but if I were to say, I'm going to have all black officers police black people. I will have all white officers police white people. I will have Chinese officers and so on. A, I don't think it's doable, but B, I don't know that it would necessarily solve the problem.
Hmm.
Part on this thing is let's understand
Right.
is that the next problem brings us into is economic. Let's go on the idea that the police are far more likely to use force in economically downturned areas than economically upturned areas. Now, you'll see it used against African Americans because the stereotype is he doesn't or she doesn't have any money. Or if they got the money and they didn't get it legally. Those are completely stupid. And the part on it, but you will see some of that in the part. But there is no doubt that the police function differently in upscale neighborhoods than they do in less affluent neighborhoods. So let's understand that there's an economic part on that. And just integrating the race doesn't bring us to that, because an awful lot of the problem is economics. And we are never, I'm in the part, going to ever solve completely the needs, the disparity in income. Where every solution to ever try on that has failed massively. And so I'm not going to communism or socialism.
Right.
However, what I do think what we have to do, and I'll have you come in on this part, Doctor, is recognize when we're holistic in this, that different communities have different needs. Okay? And we as the wealthier section, most of the people listening to this are on the upper side of this. We're doctors, we're lawyers, we're professionals. As human beings, we have a responsibility on the part. And I think that part of our tax dollars is to say, hey, look, I don't want to create police departments that are fortresses for my community. I want to create a system of justice where people have mobility and an opportunity and is not repressive. And to do that, that's where we get back to not defund, but refund. Because the incarceration system, what we are funding, you, I, the doctor, et cetera, those of us who are paying our taxes, is a mass incarceration system. And while there are some rich people who got it by stealing money and were in it, they are the tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. The massively incarcerated are poor. They start out incorporated because they can't pay bonds. They lose their job. They then, the cycle continues again and again and again, where the justice system, particularly because it never solves their problems, it only adds to their problems. This is one of the great frustrations. We'll talk about in just a minute what happens if you get arrested. And I'm here to tell you, your life's going to be a lot different if you're arrested, and how we deal with it if you have money and whether you don't, because the world will be different. The immediate part on it, it goes into, if you have money, you can post a cash bond immediately. You have money when they drop the charges, which they will if you were not breaking the law, at least that's the largest percentage of it. Or if they pursue it, to hire a lawyer to be able to defend yourself, to understand what the law was, okay, in this, in all of that. You have money, you will be able to defend yourself. If you don't have money, your defenses will be minimal. As the doctor could tell you right now in the justice system, in medicine, where are the COVID deaths? Well, they're among the vulnerable. There are three groups of vulnerable, right? There are very old people, they're vulnerable. They're in nursing homes and state-assisted facilities. That makes you vulnerable. And they're also in prisons. The next place that the vulnerable, though, are in minority communities with low level of health care with a pre-existing conditions, right, doctor?
Yes.
Yeah, that's who it hits. Why? Because they're vulnerable. Now, there may be a lottery ticket that hits a rich guy. There's parts of this virus we'll never understand. So I may buy a bad lottery ticket, but just based on my zip code and my level of income, the doctor's smiling. He can say, I'm not really worried about you in COVID, right? You can use a zip code in that part. I can do the same thing in criminal justice, Oscar. And in part,
This is sad.
next thing we have to do And this is the part where you ask how you spend your money.
Mhm.
Why do you spend so much money on prisons? Why do you spend money on private prisons? What are the programs that stop the cycle? Because I'm paying $20,000 for these people. Okay? I complain about the homeless problem, and no one enjoys that. I walk down the street in New York, Seattle, or Dallas, but most of them out there have significant mental health problems. Okay?
Right.
What are we doing about that?
Right. So
And of course, when they interact with the police, I just had in Dallas here, a man with mental health problems interacted with police. Black man is dead.
right. So I'm one of the, say for example, I'm one of the protesters and out in the street in New York,
Yes.
risking my life and other people's life, having a mask on. And what I'm frustrated about, Charlie, is this. This is happening since 1991, right?
Sure.
One after the other, after the other, and after the other. And then people like you and me come out and talk about it, discuss this.
Yes.
And then it goes under the rug and no one cares till the next things comes out and you say, oh my God, this happened 2 years ago and this happened 10 years ago. So tell me what, as a community, as an APPAC organization, activist, we can do now to avoid it tomorrow or any.
Yes. Okay. Let's first talk about protesting on the part of the thing. I think that number one, just to answer your question, local matters.
Yes.
Local matters. Fix your own police department first, and don't assume there are no problems because we haven't had one.
So Charlie,
Okay?
I just want to plug in one thing real quick before we move on, just because I think you're going section by section. And for people who are watching now and people who are going to watch later, I just want to let them know that at least in New York City, it's the New York City Council, and both Nassau and Suffolk, it's the county governments who do go give out these contracts and negotiate these contracts. So if you want to discuss what you can do in New York City, it's the New York City Council members. Those elections are next year. Those would be pertinent questions. And Nassau and Suffolk County will be the same thing next year, their elections. I think these are the questions they should be asking. This year, more so, are the state elections in every single state. And when you are talking about state contracts, those are the questions for anybody that is watching now or will watch later. Must remember, you can ask these questions. And if you really want to talk about criminal justice, forget about protesting and all that. You do that as you're doing continuously. But right now, we have primary on June 23rd in New York. And then November, we have general election for every single state. You want to speak with your state representative to talk about the state trooper contracts and so on and so forth. So I just want to plug that in, Charlie. Sorry.
Yeah, and I want to plug
very
first
good
the importance of protesting. I remember shortly after President Obama was elected, I was called to the White House. It was a great honor, to meet with the president and speak with the president. And we were talking about Guantanamo Bay. What should be done? And he talked to all the civil rights groups. And we weren't particularly happy with his overall solution, which he was never able to implement because he wasn't so much closing Guantanamo as moving it. And we wanted it closed, not moved. So, over time, things happened, et cetera. But he said something that always stuck with me. He said, if you want me to do more, you're going to have to make me. And therein goes in the part is we can vote for the leaders we want, and we're given binary choices. It's a yes or a no on this one, and some of them. But even when we get the leader we want, we've got to make them do it. How do you make them do it? Well, that's where protesting, activism, fundraising, votes, etc., showing them that the process in this. And you never know when it's going to tip. When President Obama was elected, gay marriage was voted as the California Constitution, the state constitution of California was amended to prevent gay marriage. Same election. It's 2008. Gay marriage is now legal across the country. It tipped during his presidency. He didn't speak on the issue once. Go back and look. It tipped during his presidency. And it didn't tip, he changed his viewpoints, but it didn't tip because President Obama led the charge. It tipped because the communities and people started changing their minds. And we know that we are in a time of change.
We really are. I think right
We
now,
are.
if there is a criminal justice reform that's going to happen, and if there was ever any time, let's say since, like Dr. Rizwan said, Rodney King, that we have started seeing things on video, because
Yeah,
before that,
absolutely.
anything, right?
Absolutely.
But at least
We
in
have
last
the
31,
opportunity.
right? So I think this time is the
the-
opportunity.
Yeah, and this is where I say groups like APPAC and others have to bow together, because I tell you, professionals talk strategy, or excuse me, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. And that was an Omar Bradley quote that was stolen from somebody in the Civil War in the part. But what they're saying in the part was, we can talk about how we're going to move our armies all over here, but if you don't feed them, it doesn't matter much. Professionals know we got to do the nuts and bolts work. And I'll get to what to do in a protest in just a moment. But professionals, organizations like APPAC provide the leadership for the nuts and bolts work, because they're looking at the nuts and bolts of the contract, the nuts and bolts of the platform, the nuts and bolts of where we're going to get the money and how we're going to work the budget, that it works out. They're working on each part of that because, hey, look, if we don't make the legislatures do this, they're pushing back against the people who want it to stay the way it is. And change is hard. And nuts and bolts change in this is necessary, because if it's just protest in the street and attitudes, you're not going to get the right things changed. And that's essential. Now, let me move just to a protest. Let's say you want to go out and protest. First off, what's legal and illegal? Well, generally speaking, under the First Amendment, protects your ability to protest in public spaces. Now, in New York City, in New York State, they have what are called place, time, and manner restrictions. What does a place, time, and manner restriction mean? Well, I can say, for instance, that you have to get a permit if you're going to protest in a way that would block transportation. I believe that's almost exactly what the New York part on. So the first question is if it's an unpermitted protest, the police have the right, and it's blocking transportation. So, if I'm just walking down the sidewalk with a sign, that's not blocking transportation. That's place, time, and manner in the part that I'm not restricting it. Let's say there are 5,000, 10,000, et cetera, going, and you want to go to a legal protest, one that's within part. First thing you look is, hey, do they have a permit? Okay.
So there's you cannot do protest without a permit in New York City? Is that?
Well, no, depending on what the protest is. If you're blocking traffic, you see, if we're all going to march across the Brooklyn Bridge, what's going to happen to the Brooklyn Bridge?
It's going to get shut down.
It's going to get shut down. The police would be within their rights to disperse that protest if it didn't have a permit. Now, every once in a while, the Brooklyn Bridge gets shut down, doesn't it?
Yep.
So you can get a permit. So the first thing is, are they permitting? In some of the stuff in New York, because of the public outcry, they've suspended permitting. And the first thing is, okay, is this a lawful, if we're going to be in the streets or parts on it? Now, remember, here in Texas, you don't need a permit as long as you don't block a street. Period. You never need one. You can protest anywhere in the public sphere as long as you do not impede traffic. Impede traffic, there was a big thing. A ton of protesters were arrested in Dallas because the police kind of pushed them up on the bridge. And then they impeded traffic, so they arrested them. Okay? Those all got dropped after the videos came out. I'm about to say the next part is, if ever there was a time to videotape yourself and come along with the parts on it, this is it. In this. Number two. So if it's in place manner, the First Amendment. Now, there are other things that place manner can restrict. In the city of Seattle, they restrict batons quite often. In other words, you can't have a flagpole that's longer than 3 feet long or 2 feet long. The reason for this was we fought the battle for Seattle back at one time, which was an absolute 3 days on the street. Seattle loves these things. No, they don't, but you know, it's for some reason, it's always been Seattle. So they can put on place manner type restrictions. Know what the restrictions are is lawful. The next part is, of course, having a permit doesn't mean you get to destroy property. And I don't think anyone listening to this intends to destroy property. Okay, on that part, but you have the danger of being in proximity. In this part is, I have 2 rules for this. Create peer pressure to prevent it in moving as a group, and then let the police do their job. Because one of the difficult parts is, I've been talking to all of you about use of force, training, and all of these sort of things, right? And how they need to better training and better equipment, and less military equipment and far more soft restraint equipment, right?
So I'll give you an example that the police with full gear,
yes,
protective equipment cost about $470 per person. And
yes.
how much it costs per person, per police officer. And you know how much it costs for a doctor who's working in intensive care to be protected from this coronavirus?
Yes.
Not even $35.
Yes.
So that is where the distribution of money, that is what it means, that defunding the police. It doesn't mean that you provide your funding to appropriate sources to avoid public disaster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That we need a holistic idea of what is health and what is a safe and happy society. And that is a discussion from which everyone benefit. But in the protests now, so protesting, it is absolutely legal. And in fact, you know, most protests, when they're small, go off without a hitch. We can all go down, walk on a sidewalk, etc. Now those protests, you know, they may get the news media, etc., at least interested that there are some people who are against this, but they're not the massive scale that these protests are. Massive scale protests have a much larger move. And if you want to participate in that protest, in the time of COVID, I would strongly suggest you have protective gear. You have a responsibility, not just to yourself, but to your family and to your friends. And this prevents you from spreading it. It doesn't, the doctor will tell you it doesn't really protect you. It prevents you from spreading it, but you have a responsibility if you want to go. And the next part that I have on it, well, let me go. What if I'm arrested?
Yes, so
right?
Arrested in 3 different scenarios before you answer this question. So for example, if I'm protesting and I'm nearby this where the looting starts, for example, and I get arrested. Or if I'm arrested by blocking the traffic. Or if someone knocks at my door and saying that, you know, I need to give me your cell phone, or I want to search your home.
Sure.
You've been too much.
Let's go to the last one, the other part on interactions with the police. Okay. Number 1 in the interactions on the police. The police can arrest you for anything. That's a physical part, and they're not the judge and jury, and neither are you. My first immediate part when the police come to arrest, say that they're going to arrest you, is complete compliance. Complete compliance. I can't defend you saying, well, you were wrong. I can sue them for falsely arresting you, but I cannot defend you for defending yourself. Okay? You say,
That's a very important point.
And I'm there is the first number 1 rule for protesters is you're not here to argue with the individual officer. Not here to do that. Okay? Now, some protesters want to get arrested. That's what happened in Buffalo.
Mm.
Really?
Yeah.
Mm.
You
What
think
he's
so?
doing is breaking the curfew. Okay? He's the sole man out here standing, breaking the curfew. That's
Yeah,
a
but pushing
point.
down him to the ground, Charlie, though?
No, you're missing the point. He went there to get arrested, not to get abused.
Hmm.
I've been on the other side of this. I represented the Navy in the Vieques bombing range. I sometimes had 20, 30, 40,000 protesters. One of the protesters that I personally supervised the arrest of was Al Sharpton, who had come to get arrested. You know, he was going to trespass. You don't have a right to protest on a military facility. You can protest outside of it, but not on it. He'd come to protest on the bombing range. I knew we were going to arrest him. We did so in the nicest fashion you've ever seen. And I sat with him and talked to him for a while, et cetera, till we had part on things. They're here to be arrested. What he was doing there is he's there to be arrested. That is a form of protest. What he is protesting is the curfew. That you are saying we have to stop, that you are clearing this area. So I, rather than a black, and he believes as he walks out there, that because I'm a 75-year-old white man who's a professional protester, the man had been arrested many times before. At nuclear, I've dealt with these guys my whole life in the military, because I was the SJ, you know, I had legal parts up in Bangor, Washington, where they have the ballistic missiles. And there are people who are vehemently opposed to nuclear. And I was always asked, how do I get this job? And the admiral would say, because you speak liberal. Okay? And I would head out to head up and make sure that our arrests, because they're not violent, they're not here to fight. They're here to get arrested. They're sitting on the train track to prevent the thing. They will be arrested. And that will be the point, that we are arresting them for preventing something from happening. They are protesting an unjust law by having it enforced against them. Okay? So he is there to be arrested. The police know that. What do they do wrong? They say, screw it. We're not arresting you. We're assaulting you. We'll teach you this time. It would have been simple as heck. He's violating the curfew. Officer stops, puts the handcuffs on him. He would have gone, I guarantee you, without a single part on it. The protest, you know, it's sort of the guy in Tiananmen Square, right? I'm not going to fight. He's not here to fight. He's here to be arrested, or what part? It is an elder of the community, a Catholic, you know, who has very strong beliefs. I love these guys in the Catholic Church. I defend them. And a guy like me will go defend them in the part. Or young Muslim students who stand up in a protest where they know they're going to get arrested. That was the idea. They're not here to be violent. The police chose to be violent there. That's the part of the thing is. Now I go, if you're going to get arrested, make sure you have a cell phone and somebody videotaping you being arrested. If that's your point. I don't think the people here are going for the purpose of being arrested. In other words, violating a curfew, violating something. Now, the police arbitrarily, to try and break up protests that were unpermitted in day 3 and day 4 and day 8 of this, arrested people for things that weren't violations. They arrested a lot of people for inciting riot or participating in a riot. They almost never can prove that. They just, you know, as my father once said, when he got in, when my father got arrested for inciting a riot when he was interviewing for a professorship, although he had nothing to do with it, they tend to arrest the guys who are standing still. Now, at that time, he looked like the student, et cetera, so he was standing still. They don't like to chase people. Because if you think about it, they're staying together. So if they have to chase somebody, it breaks them up into ranks. It breaks their ranks. So they tend to rest the rest of the people who are standing still, which can result in some
You're
people.
giving out pointers over here, Charlie.
What's that?
You're giving out pointers over
Yes,
here.
that's good.
I've been on all sides of this.
So
So
Charlie,
the first part is videotape, and I would say right now the police have gotten a lot better. In the videotapes change behavior. And at least in the city of Dallas and other places, they're starting to learn that, hey, look, this is not working. Let's say I go to a lawful protest. It was permitted, or it was not supposed to block traffic or anything like that. And I am arbitrarily arrested on the part. Cooperate. Don't talk about what happened. Usually they're not interviewing anyway. Their whole idea is to use the arrest power to clear the streets. Issue on a citation, etc. Most of these, unless you're hit with incitement to riot, which is a class in most states, in Texas, it's a class C felony, which means you have to post bond. But if you're just hit with blocking traffic or something like that, or obstruction and that sort of thing, disturbing the peace, blah, blah, blah. They can write whatever they write on it. You post your $300 bond and you're out of there. Okay.
if you don't have money for bond, if you're a student or if you are, what do you do if you don't have that?
Now
If
we
you just
hit
poor
the
student?
inequities of the system. One of the things that we have to get rid of. Yeah, now you have a problem, and you may be sitting until you can appear before a magistrate. And if I'm there. If you're going to protest on a Monday night. If you're going to get arrested on Monday night. Here's where not to get arrested: Friday night. You may be spending the weekend.
So in New York, right, we just had a bond reform where there is no cash bail bonds anymore, right?
Right.
You get arrested, you don't have it. At least for people who are watching this is an information. Not that I'm encouraging anybody to go out and get arrested and telling that, hey, listen, you don't have to post bond. But in New York, at least, we have a law on the books now, which we are getting pushback. And I think some reform is going to come down the pipeline for it. But at least in New York now, there is a law that says that if you don't have the money for the bond, you will be released.
Right.
Charlie, you talk about the disparities, right?
Right. No, but here becomes the immediate. Let's talk about just for a protester disparity in that law. If you don't have the money, many bonds, on the part where there are no outstanding, let's presume everybody who went there was law abiding, there are no outstanding warrants or warrants on them. Okay. Wants, writs, or warrants. So none of that are out for them. They go in, they're on a misdemeanor obstruction of traffic. Okay? Was what they were cited for. Or disorderly conduct.
Will that affect my admission to the university? Or
non-violent resisting arrest? Well, you're lying on the part. Basically, misdemeanor level type stuff. And they go, okay, most of those have preset bond amounts. Even though you no longer have cash bond, you get to the station, and after they take your fingerprints and all that sort of stuff, if you've got a credit card, you're out of there. If you don't have a credit card, you're going to have to wait for the magistrate. And if you have no ability to pay, and he finds you have no ability to pay, then you'll be out on a different recognizance system. But you'll have to check in more. Okay? Citation, etc. So I will tell you that based on the amount of no system is going to eliminate completely the part of it. Let's deal with the last question. What if the police come to your house?
Right.
I'm going to presume for the purposes of this, they do not have a warrant.
Yes.
This is my favorite example in the world. I'm knocking on my little screen. Knock, knock, knock. I'm at the Gates residence and I'm 2 FBI agents for this purpose, but I could be anybody. Hi, I'm from the FBI and I'd like to talk to Mr. Bill Gates about a few irregularities that we might have noted down at the Gates Foundation. Does he have a little bit of time for us? What happens next? Sure, come on in. Let's have cookies and Mr. Gates will be down to see you.
That's
Well,
majority of the
right?
Muslims.
What's that?
That's good.
That's majority of the Muslim Americans.
It's what minorities
Right.
do.
Will Mr. Gates be down to see them? No, he won't. Mr. Gates's answer, the question, will Mr. Gates never talk to them? No, I don't know that. He may well talk to them. Okay? On this, on the part on it, is in this, he may well talk to them. Okay? On the process in this, in the part, but the question won't be, will Mr. Gates have a lawyer? No. The question will be, how many lawyers will Mr. Gates have, right? Because he'll have at least 4. Okay? Maybe more.
So I just want to recap couple things, Charlie. I think just on the protest part, because I think
Right.
we're having a lot of discussion, and I want to take some of the solid points out of our discussions and kind of keep bringing that up. And I'll of course do it at the end of the conversation as well. So during the protest, if you're out there, anybody that is watching that, and if you're getting arrested, number one is don't resist. That's very important. Number 2 is that if somebody can record that, that's also very, very important that you're getting arrested. And number 3,
By the way, one thing that the police, they might arrest you or part on it, but it is unconstitutional for the police to demand that you turn off a cell phone.
okay, so that's also good to know. And number 3 is that if you're getting arrested, you do not have to speak to the cops right then and there at that point.
Nope.
Which a lot of people
Oh.
do know, because they say that anything you can say can and will be used against in the court of law. So
Right.
that's a more
What you do
well-known-
have to do,
And no
officer,
resistance. And no resistance.
no resistance, and the part is, what you should do though, is identify yourself.
Okay.
If you don't identify yourself, remember when I said wants, writs, or warrants and they can't issue a ticket? You're going to the tank until they can identify you.
Okay. All right.
So it's not up. What you give is my name, my address, happily hand over the driver's license. Beyond that, nope.
Okay. All right. So that's number 1. And then, and I want to get into the last section.
And I want to add, have your cell phone and credit card with you. In New
Yeah.
York.
Right. Well, if you want to and don't protest on a Friday night.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, these are practical tips.
That's
These
right.
are practical tips from the criminal justice system.
And if someone knocks at your door,
Kathy says the worst day in the world is the day before Thanksgiving. Don't do that.
right,
So-
and if someone knocks at your door, if I read it correctly, you said do not talk to them.
Right. Well, this is be very polite and set up an appointment. They've come to you to catch you off guard. They want you to be embarrassed and think that you can fix this, that you will let them in. They think that you will worry that people will think you are guilty. I use the Gates example because did anyone believe that Mr. Gates had committed a crime in my example? No.
no.
And did he's asking for a lawyer or you make an appointment for this, did that make you think that he was guilty of a crime?
Nope.
No, they don't get to interpose on your time. And if they're coming in as asking for a lawyer, the part is ask for a lawyer. Now, if you can't afford one, or you think that you might have it, this is my one moment to plug the Constitutional Law Center for Muslims in America and others. If it's a federal agent that's come to see you, or a federal agent is with some local state agents on it, and they would like to talk to you, and you don't have the means to a lawyer, then please go to our website. We do this nationally. We may farm this out if it's depending on what it is, we'll get a volunteer to help you. If it's particular areas of national security, we'll help you. It's absolutely critical in the end to have representation to enforce your rights. That brings us back to the entire idea. The Constitution's great, but if the courts aren't open, we can't enforce them. But even if the courts are open, if you don't have representation, it's a little like saying, hey, look, we have these miracle cures for cancer, but if I'm expected to administer them to myself, doctor, how am I going to do? Kill myself, right? In the best case scenario, I may kill myself horribly and slowly in the worst case scenario. So, you're going to need, we as a society need to open the courts more to reform the police. We need to close the prisons and use alternative methodology to create a better society. If we ran medicine the way we were running law enforcement, we'd be in incredible trouble. There are reforms.
I want to get into one last section, Charlie, and we will recap everything at the end. But I want to get into one last section, and that is probably the most important for our viewers as Muslim Americans, right?
Sure.
And that is the freedom of speech of Muslim Americans in a private setting.
Yes.
Right? Not public. Protest is more of a freedom of speech in a public setting.
Yes.
That's a protest. I'm talking about our private speech as Muslim Americans in private setting, over phone,
right,
over text messages, in a house.
And that is under incredible attack.
And I would say that is mosque where you go for prayer, or churches for the matter of, or synagogue, are they private or a public?
Yeah. Well, I would say on the part is that they are a little of both. And that's a difficult answer. Let me answer your part on the last one, private, public. Okay? The Supreme Court in 1980, in the 70s and 80s, recognized the importance of private speech as much as the importance of public speech. In U.S. Court versus, in the Supreme Court, which was a national security case brought to the Supreme Court, the justices wrote at the time that private speech is essential to a free and operating society. The ability to be free of government intrusion and free of the fear is essential. The other part on it is more recently, there was a famous case where in and I'm not applauding her speech, but there was a young lady who worked in a court. And this was at the time when the assassination attempt was made on President Reagan. And President Reagan did not have the greatest relations with the African-American community in the party. And she said to the deputy that she was in a private room, well, the next time I hope they get him. Somebody overheard her and she was fired for it. And the Supreme Court overturned it, saying her protected speech, her private speech must be protected from government intercept. The fact that he'd come in and overheard, et cetera, and then took action on it, violated her rights to private political opinions. Okay? These are under an incredible assault. I have a case in Tennessee right now where the government argues that the use of the secret chat app in Telegram to have political discussions about Syria constitutes obstruction of justice, punishable by 20 years.
Can you explain that, Charlie?
What they argue is that because the secret chat creates for a moment a document that is then destroyed, this makes a private conversation private. One of the things on our technology is today I've known that this isn't a private conversation. I've intended to have it in public because you're taping it and you're going to put it out and I'll lose control of it. On the other hand, say I wanted to talk to you privately and I didn't want to give you the rights to take or cut or edit what I said. Well, I would do that on one of the many apps, either Facebook or whatnot, by having a private conversation where you don't get to record me, right? And it deletes after we've had the conversation as we're making it. The federal government is arguing in this case that the use of that app constituted obstruction of justice under 18 U.S.C. 1519, which was passed after the Arthur Anderson part. In other words, they are attacking at all places in the name of national security, privacy, from the FISA courts to privacy abilities and privacy features on cell phones and apps, encryption apps, their battle against Apple. What they want to leave open is the ability to monitor. We go, well, there's the Fourth Amendment. I go, the Fourth Amendment only matters if they use it against you in a court of law. It only matters there. Because if the government is now listening to every conversation, interceding on it, using it, and we have to go to court on criminal charges and decide whether that was constitutional or not, it has an incredibly chilling effect on speech. And, you know, our guiding light at the Center for Constitutional Law for Muslims in America, where these are at the heart of our issues.
Wonderful. So,
is this idea that secret lists and monitoring private conversations, and don't think that the private conversation, just because you didn't go to court, didn't have implications. They can use that private conversation to put you on a secret list that they never disclose, and you don't get to challenge, and bad things start happening. So absolutely.
right.
And no Muslim in America doesn't worry today
So this,
about what they say in an app.
right. So what, to wrap this thing up, I think we are almost over 1 hour. I wanted to say is this, that what we do practically want to do with APPAC, but with every week's conversation, we just have some action items for ourselves and distribute.
Yeah.
So I think what we will do with this today's talk, we will make a list of do and don't of interaction with law and enforcement both.
Yes. Let's go on the part of the thing here is, I've got 4 things.
Okay.
And you know what? Islam is the greatest guide on this. I love this guide on it. If there's an injustice, if you have the ability to stop it, you stop it. If you see injustice and you have the ability to stop it, it is as if you did it yourself, right? That's number 1.
Yes.
Now, if you don't have the ability to stop it, you have to speak against it, right?
Mhm.
And if speaking against it would put you in jail or is not permissible at that time, you have to hate it, pray against it, and seek the ability to speak in the future, right? This is a simple. I go, okay, let's use that checklist. Let's use the Islamic checklist for everything we're going to do here today. Number 1, locally, we have the ability, if we're community leaders and voters, we have the ability to hold our local city council. We have the ability to inform ourselves about our police. We need to take a different view. We've always been they're them rather than they're our employees. I want you to think of the moment right here. I want to change in mindset is I pay taxes in this community. They're my employee. And some of the listeners here pay a lot of taxes in this community. And they're my employees, and I'm responsible for them. I'm responsible for the contract. I'm responsible for their performance. I'm responsible. It's not them. It's not somebody else. They work for me. And I want my money spent smart, and I want my part on this thing. So if every one of us take today that our local police work for us, okay? And we're going to have the police department we want and we desire, and we get active in that, then that's going to happen. So that's something we can change right now. A lot of this, as you said, has happened over and over and over again because we, the people who could change it, because they work for us, the tax dollars come from us. We elect the city council. We have all that part on it. We're not doing our jobs. Let's do that one. The next thing is we can speak against it. And in part is some of us have significant resources where city councilmen will listen because they need the resources. Others just are going to speak against it. We'll speak on the part locally on the part, and we will let people know and voice for justice and part on it. We will speak in the part. The next thing is I go on the part is, hey, look, we have a duty to inform ourselves. I'm going to take that last one too, not just hate it, but inform ourselves. So we need to know when we're going into any election, any part or anything on it, what is the law? What are they doing? What is each candidate's position? Because if I don't know, this is what Islam says on an injustice, is if you don't put it into your heart and do something about it, then you're actionable for it. Even if you couldn't do anything, you have to know about it, ingrained and hate it. And if you're not informed, you can't do those things. So we're going to do that locally. Nationally, we're going to look to the parties and we're going to push every candidate. This should be a bipartisan issue.
Right.
Listen to all the candidates. It shouldn't be, oh, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, you're going to be this or that. I want smart, I want better. I want money spent better. Okay? Our government, there shouldn't be a right-wing government or a left-wing government. There should be a good government.
Absolutely.
Part of the thing is good government is what we're looking for. And good government is smart government. Good government spends resources in a way that we're all proud of. Okay? Number 3 on the part. So we want to look at that. We'll support any candidate in the group who's for good government. Okay? Good government. Part of that is we need, we believe that sunshine, just like the law you passed, is the best disinfectant. And government that has to hide what it does or hide behind liability shields will never be good government.
Absolutely.
Very well. Absolutely.
It will never be good. If you're hiding behind shields or hiding behind things, you will never be good government. And the last part is that we as a society have to adopt the Ben Franklin point. This is one of our mottos. He who would sacrifice liberty for a little personal liberty for a little temporary security deserves neither liberty nor security. Okay? So in the part on that is when we go into it in private conversations, in private things, we cannot sacrifice liberties for quote unquote illusionary temporary security. It will always be abused. I am not a fan of the current administration, but I think they have one valid point on the FBI investigation. What came out of it was that the FBI lied repeatedly in FISA applications. Okay? And all I ask is if they were willing to lie about friends of the potential candidate, potential president of the United States and cut corners, what exactly are they doing with Muslims?
Absolutely. I think very in
this process. So we need to demand reform in that part. And the last part is that I think as a community and a group, we also understand something. And Muslims understand this, African Americans understand this, all of it part of this. I don't have to agree with you to want your rights to be protected. That needs to become our mantra in this country. I don't have to agree with you to want your rights to be protected.
Very well said, Charlie.
And again, I wish I had the paraphrase from the prophet, but basically that's one of his core ideas. You didn't have to agree to Islam for me to protect your rights.
Absolutely. So Charlie, thank you very much for being here for an hour, Dr. Rizwan. Again, thank you very much for leading the conversation. I want to give a little plug to Constitutional Law Center for Muslims in America. They're based out of Dallas, Texas. Please go visit their website. It's clcma.org. And two of their guiding principles is challenging governmental security measures affecting Muslim communities which encroach upon their constitutional liberties, which is for all of us, of course, and then protecting the rights of Muslims, individuals, and organizations, which is very important to note.
Yes.
to exercise their constitutional rights to worship.
And
And CLCMA, provides pro bono legal representation in federal courts. Charlie, am I correct?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Not in the
You know,
state courts. On the
think of
federal
us as the people who represent you when the federal government comes. They tend not to come and bang people's faces in the ground. Instead, they come in a different manner. But
And
it's
it's
not
very
all that
important,
scary.
right? And it's very important for anybody that's listening this and watching this. I really, really implore you to support CLCMA, to go visit the website. Uh, uh, you know, God forbid you ever have to use them. I hope not, but if you do, I
Well,
would
our
really.
goal for the people listening here today is by defending the people we do today, we prevent you from ever needing it. The smart way in the civil rights movement is we stand for the smallest, not the largest.
Absolutely.
And I want to say, and Charlie, on behalf of APPAC and all the Muslim community, you guys are doing a fantastic work, a very phenomenal work. That's what
Thank you.
stands for, that there are people who defend you, even if you don't have anything. I think we are the most suffering society after 9/11. There's a group of
Yes. Oh, absolutely. This
You are
is
the
one
one
where I
who
say,
are
by the way,
with us.
all these reforms at the federal level help Muslims
Thank
because
you very
they will protect again. There's no one group that gets abused. This is one of the parts on it. It spreads. It always spreads.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Athar. And we will
Great.
again next week with someone else.
Great. Bye.
Charlie, guys, thank you, guys.